The world is home to over 1.8 billion people between the ages of 10 to 24, and that's a very huge youth population. Youth are just not victims of climate change, but can also be key contributors to climate change action. We're still on the sidelines of the Zimbabwe Alternative Mining Indaba, #ZAMI 2022, and the name is marvelous, Tinevi Mbochi Bagidi, and today we'll be discussing youth participation in climate change action. And I'm joined by a fine gentleman from Zimbabwe. I'm allowed to do that, and he's going to introduce himself to our audience and listeners online.
All right, guys, this is Kudakwashe Makanda. I am a programs officer for Youth Initiatives for Community Development, which is a youth organization that works in Mashonaland East Province in the 4 districts, that is Mudzi, Murewa, UMP, and Mutoko. Yeah. Okay,
thank you very much. He's working from my Kumusha, which is Usumba Maramba Pfungwe. I don't know what it's popular for, but anyway, that's a story for another day. So we're going to start with just simply explaining or just dissecting what exactly is climate change, because we've got people out there who just see it as this technical and scientific term. So what exactly is climate change? And when we're talking about climate change action, what exactly are we talking about?
All right. Okay, so in simple terms, climate change are the day-to-day, events that we're dealing with in as far as weather and climate is concerned. So we're talking about the shift in weather patterns, right, from what has been happening in previous years to the current trends that are actually happening now. So this change in weather events, we're talking about your erratic rainfall that is now, the normalcy in our day-to-day lives. For example, back then, there are certain regions that used to actually receive a lot of rainfall, but in the past years, that has actually been changing. We have also been experiencing, drought spells, right, that are very prolonged. And we have also been having, a shift in our seasons, right, whereby we're having longer winters and even probably longer summers as well. So that's whole package is what we then call climate change.
Yeah. Okay, and when we're talking about climate change action now, what exactly are we talking about? What does that entail?
So climate change action simply means acting towards remedying that situation that is very adverse to the well-being of a human being, right? Okay. I'll give you an example of what's happening in Pakistan right now, whereby there is flooding that has been unprecedented, right? It has never really happened before in that nation. And this is because, because of the climate change effect. So when we're talking about climate action now, we are saying how best can we remedy the situation. Okay. Now we're talking about the actions that we then need to take in as far as, first curbing the causes of climate change, right? And then also dealing with the effects, right? Now that the climate change scourge is already affecting people, how then do we capacitate the communities so that they can adapt to the new scenario that is amongst us now? Yeah.
Okay, so could I mention that when we're talking now about climate change action, we're talking about how to deal with the effects of climate change. We're also talking about how to curb or remedy climate change, which simply affects not just the Zimbabweans or people of the global north, but affects anyone and even the future generations to come. You've mentioned the effects of climate change. You mentioned the examples of droughts. We've got a clear and a ready example of Cyclone Idai and the droughts in certain regions of Zimbabwe. So why should a Zimbabwean youth be concerned by issues to do with climate change?
All right. So I'll give you a very relatable example, given the work that I do with the communities that I work in. So there used to be a time whereby water was accessible very closely to where people stay, right? There wouldn't be a need for you to walk kilometers. But now, when you're approaching this summer season, whereby the temperatures are becoming more hotter, right? And whereby we're having more heat waves, right? It means that the water table is getting super low, right? Beyond our access. You see, so we then have situations whereby people now have to walk for 10 kilometers to go get water, right? Yes. We have situations in Mudzi whereby people can actually get to a river that is dried up and have to actually dig so as to wait for water to fill up. So it can take up to 3 hours to just fill one water bucket.
Wow.
So that is the whole climate change happening right in our background.
In our communities,
you see.
yes.
And young women are the most affected, right? Because one, they are the ones that then have to also walk for longer distance to get the water, right?
Yes.
And in as far as the fuels are concerned, we're talking that our economy is agro-based, right? And most rural and our largest population is in rural areas. And what substitutes or what these rural homes actually survive on is usually agriculture, right? They farm for subsistence. So the minute that we have dry spells, the minute that we have erratic rainfall, it means that food security is already compromised.
Yes.
Right? So we have a lot of young people that are involved in horticultural activities. In Mutoko, you go to Mutoko, you see a lot of young people that are growing tomatoes, that are growing onions, right? Now, back then they used to have better yields, but the yields continue to dwindle because there no longer is availability of water.
Water, yes.
See. So that also has an economic aspect to it as well, because now the income that they used to generate back then is now different.
Not the same anymore, yes.
You see, and issues of food security. Now, back then people used to send their kids to school, right? But they can no longer fulfill such fundamental rights, you see, because of effects of climate change.
Climate change, yeah.
You see. So that is the human face and that is the youth face.
And that's why the youth should be actually concerned.
Exactly.
Yes. Could I mention, I love how he's very passionate about the districts that he's working in, and he's mentioning that some of those people are affected because of how the youth are participating in horticulture in areas like Mutoko and in Mudzi, and now due to the erratic temperatures and the very high temperatures, particularly in this season that we are in before the rains, that means these guys have less yields, and that means less income. Okay, so with that being said, there's always talk of these big tables. There's always of portfolio meetings, hearings, and we've got the parliament sitting for different issues. And even there's always, the government is also trying to include the youth. But in your view, with someone who's actually working with the youth, you're always on the ground.
Yeah.
How do you think that the lack of inclusion when it comes to decision making, how does it hinder youth participation in climate change action?
Right.
Because we have the youth who are out there and they know what's going on, but they're not on the table, to then discuss a climate change action that's suitable with them, because we need to package this in a way that's friendly and that relates to the people in the communities. So how does not being on the table hinder youth participation when it comes to climate change action?
All right. So the first thing that I think we also need to actually first unpack is what will be happening on this table, so that we know how very impactful it then has on youth's participation. So the table that we're talking about is decision making, right? And with the decision making, we're talking about if we have resources, if we have funds, what are we going to use the funds for?
Okay.
Right? So this is happening at a local authority level, whereby the council is discussing the budget, right? At a national level, whereby the Ministry of Finance is discussing the budget, whereby Parliament is discussing what goes to which ministry, how much goes to this ministry, right? So the minute that a young person or the young people are not included in that whole,
discussion,
in all these other forums, then their capacity or their ability to then act towards remedying the climate change crisis becomes undermined, right? So we are saying, for example, we have public hearings, right, that are, around, for example, right now we're into fossil fuels. Yes, Zimbabwe, right? There's a lot of mining of coal that's happening in Wange, right? And we understand that fossil fuels are one of the enablers of this very crisis that we're having, right? So what then is it that we're saying about us trying to stop climate change, right? And then also, what other opportunities actually are coming with climate change, and how can young people be allocated in that value chain? Right? So now we're talking about renewable energy, right?
Yes.
But then if there is no young person who is involved in that discourse, then the young people are not going to actually be able to speak the fact that there are a lot of jobs that can be created, right, through us transitioning from using coal to renewable energy. And the young people stand to benefit because they're the ones that are mostly unemployed, but have a lot of skills. They are graduates, academics and all that, right? So that's one. And then when we're talking about Ministry of Finance allocating, disbursing funds, right? We have the devolution fund, for example. And unfortunately, I think you saw what happened recently, whereby there was a certain minister who was, instructing what local authorities use with the devolution funds that are being, disbursed from central government. I believe that such decisions should actually come from the marginalized communities. That is, your marginalized groupings like your youth, like your women, your people with disabilities, to then decide what exactly should be used for these funds, right? Because, for example, if you were to then say Minister of Finance then disburses a certain amount towards climate change relief, right? Or towards climate change adaptation or mitigation, then we know that we're moving forward, right? In as far as, preserving the human dignity of young people. Because trust me, there is nothing that is more painful than for a young person to not be able to go to school because they have to go fetch for water that is 20 kilometers or that is 10 kilometers away. You see? So that now is the reason why there is a need to include young people in this decision-making spaces.
I see Kuda is very fast. He went a gear up, he went a notch up when he was talking about why decision makers should include the youth when it comes to this cause of climate changing, because them not being on the table means that whatever is being put on the table by the decision makers sometimes might hinder youth participation in climate change action. And now short and closing remarks, Kuda, how best do you think that the local youth, despite the hindrances that you've mentioned, how best can the youth actually participate and tackle when it comes to this whole climate action movement? How best can the youth in Zimbabwe involve themselves so that we tackle climate change?
I think first is the need for them to understand that this is a real thing that is there, right? And the minute that they can actually appreciate that this is here to stay, then the better, right? And climate change is something that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, right? Indeed. And so our efforts are, things that we also do on a day-to-day basis, right? How much water are we using? How much water are we conserving? How much water are we wasting, right? How much energy, the electricity, how many lights are you leaving turned on, right? That whole aspect, right? And then also, in as far as, in as far as revegetating the land, right? How many trees are we planting, right? These are the low-hanging fruits that we can have an effect on, right? We're cutting down trees, are we planting more, right? And then not just that, but also coming to the point of also, accepting that there is the need to be innovative, because there is no way that communities can adapt without bringing in the innovation aspect, right? We have a lot of waste that's there. We have a lot of plastic that's being around, right? We have a lot of carbon that's being released. What is it that we can do as a young people to just ensure that we are innovative enough to improve the situation, right? So there is a lot of issue around innovation. For example, we have young people that are involved in biodiversity preservation, right? We have young people that are making, fertilizers out of your manure, out of your biodegradable waste, right? So these are efforts that are being done by young people to ensure that the adaptability is possible and it's also affordable and it's also readily available. You see, so we have a lot of resources that are around us that can actually help us to adapt. Now the question is, how innovative are we? How are we pushing ourselves forward? And also, how can also young people be active? I think the whole idea of getting into decision-making places or processes, right? That is contesting for public office. Because trust me, this is where key decisions are going to be made, right? So if you are a councillor, then you know that you can speak your voice into how the council is going to budget, right? If you are an MP, you can speak onto what exactly the national budget is going to be, right? And also, if you are to monitor how these resources are used, you see, because there is that active citizenship that is then needed from the young people to then say, here's a young person, how are you monitoring the use of funds? You see, because sometimes we now have this situation whereby people are getting sick due to climate change. Because, for example, I'll give you, there is malaria that is caused by climate change, because with hotter temperatures and then the stagnant waters, then there is that likely spread of the malaria disease. But then do we have public facilities like the clinics that are available to ensure that the people are treated on time? You see.
I see.
So the minute that you then begin to get involved in monitoring this process, just as a young person, to then know if the council say that they're going to budget such an amount towards the building of clinics, how much has actually been used towards that?
Yes.
You see.
Thank you very much, Kuda. And we're still on the sidelines after Zimbabwe Alternative Mining Endeavor #Zami2022. And we were discussing youth participation in climate change. That's my name is Marvelous Tanebo Chibagidi, and that is all for now.
Right.